This is Gemara in Kesubos, Daf Ayin Gimel, learning for this month. The month of Elul has been generously sponsored as an incredible schos, neshama, for Estel Reyzel, Basra, Mair, Mir Hashem. The learning of the entire Chabura as we march towards Rosh Hashanah should bring Esther Reyzel, Basra, Mair, an incredible Aliyas Neshama, higher in their place in Gan Eden Shalmayla. We pick it up, we just finished learning the Mishnah on Ayin Beis Amid Beis. And the Mishnah discussed the din of one who marries a woman on condition that she has no nidarim. And then we find out that indeed she does have nidarim. Or he marries someone without specifying and we find that she has nidarim. In the first case we said they are not married. In the second case we said they're married but she does not get her ksuba. Says the Gemara, before we get into that fine nuance of the difference between case A and case B in the Mishnah, we begin that apparently our Mishnah is a bit redundant. Says the Gemara, Tanan Nami. And we learned as well, Gabe Kedushin. We learned as well the same exact carbon copy Mishnah with regard to Kedushin. Ki Gavna. So I asked the Gemara, I don't understand. Our Mishnah says a halacha or says two halachas. The Gemara in Kedushin says the exact same thing. Why? Answers the Gemara, Hacha Kesubos is trichalei. On our Mishnah, the focus is the din of Ksuba, the second din in the Mishnah. Tana Kedushin atu Kesubos. So once it was saying the halacha of Kesubos, it parenthetically almost, derech agav, it is brought along the halacha of Kedushin. Whereas Hasam over there in Kedushin is trichalei. Over there, the main focal chiddush is Kedushin. Tana Kesubos atu Kedushin. So over there, it brought down the din of Kesubos because it brought down Kedushin. So each place, the halacha is being brought down really for the other entity. Now we continue and try to figure out what are these nidarim that the Mishnah is discussing. Says the Gemara, we're 8 lines from the end of Ayin Beis Amid Beis. Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Shimon Yoitzadik Be'elu Nidarim Amru. The following Nidarim, they said, if she makes a neder that she will not eat meat, she will not drink wine, nor will she wear colored clothing. What's the big deal about these things? Why does the husband necessarily clear? So Rashi over here points out the reason is because these are entities that cause her to be repulsive, unattractive, and that's the reason why they make a difference to the husband. Tananami Hachi, the Gemara continues, it brings Araya Bilun Davarim Amru, Tvarim Shishbem Inui Nefesh, things that cause the affliction of herself. Continues the Gemara and says, Havei bar Rav Papa. Rav Papa was delving, was wondering, was questioning our Mishnah. Ahai. On what case does the Mishnah refer to? Ilema Reisha. If it's referring to the first case, what was the first case? So again, we began today with this introductory remark. What was case number 1? Case number 1 was that he married her with the Tanai Hamakadish as Ishtay Amenas She'ein Aleha Nidarim. He married her with a clear stipulation. He does not want her to have nidarim, and then she did. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. So now we're saying, which type of nidarim? Ask Rabbi, I don't understand. If he specified clearly he doesn't want his wife to have nidarim, so what's the difference? What type of nidar? He said, I don't want her to have nidarim, and she does. Ella Seifa. It must go on the end of the Mishnah. What was the Seifa? In which he married her without any stipulation, Concise stamp. And then we find out that she has these Nidarim. And these are the cases which the Mishnah says they are married but she loses her ksuba. And this is where the Gemara is explaining for which items will we say she's married but she will lose her ksuba. The items that we began off, she won't eat meat, wine, won't get dressed, the color clothing, things that make her unattractive to her husband. Rav Ashi Amar, that's Pshat number 1. That's Rav Papa. Says Rav Ashi, Lo'ilama Reish. Really, it's going on the Reish. Really, it's going on the first case of the Mishnah, in which he specified he does not want his wife to have an nidarim. And even though he said, I want specifically a wife without nidarim, says the Gemara, he's only able to be makbid on things that people are generally makbid on. Midi de kapti boy, and she thinks that people are makbid on having kapita that's considered a kapita that would force that it's not a marriage. Kapti midi de lo kapti boy, and she love kapita kapti. He can't be caring about things that people do not generally care about, and these are the entities which the Gemara explains. Things that affect him. That is where he has the ability of saying, "I married you. I didn't want to dar him," and therefore they are not married. Continues the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom. Itmar. Kidsha al Tanai v'konsa stam. We spoke about in our Mishnah case of he did kedushin with a Tanai of no nadarim, or we spoke about a case of konsa stam, they just got married. Now the Gemara entertains what happens if we have a bit of each. Kidsha al Tanai, he married her on condition that she has no nadarim, but then v'konsa, then he went and he did a nisuin stam. He just did nisuin and he didn't say anything. So what is the status of this marriage? Rav Omar, Tzricha Himenu Get, Shmuel Omar, Einoi Tzricha Himenu Get. A machlokes Rav and Shmuel, whether they are indeed married. Says Rav, Tzricha Himenu Get. You went, even though you spoke out a condition by the Irisin, but then you went and you got married, stam, without saying anything. You're a married man. And therefore, he needs to give her a get to get divorced. Shmuel says, no, they're not married. So what exactly is this machlokes? Says the Gemara, Amar Abaya explains Abaya. Turning over to, trying to turn over. One moment, let's turn over here. There we go. Turning over to Ayin Gimel Amar Aleph, and now everyone who was perhaps nervous about the timing, you realize why we were not nervous, because a bit of a short Amar Aleph. Turning over to Amar Aleph explains Abayi what is Pshat Loi Tema Time of the Rav Kivan Shekonsa Stam. Don't say that the reasoning of Rav is because he married her without saying anything. He did nisu and he did chuppah without saying anything, and therefore what? Achuli achla litanoi. Don't say that the reason of Rav is because since he married without saying anything, therefore that's in essence being Michael, forgiving and saying I don't care about my stipulation. Rather, says Abayo, Elataima de Rav, you know really what the reason of Rav was? Lefi shein adam oisa bilasai bilasnos. It wasn't merely because the fact that he didn't assume without specifying anything that means he's willing to get married without any strings attached. But rather, explains Abayo, Rav is of the opinion, ein adam oisa bilasai bilasnos. What does that mean? That means we assume that any time there's going to be an act of intercourse, an act of intimacy between husband and wife, we assume that a Jewish person wants that act to be considered a real act, and he doesn't want it to be considered znus. And therefore, because they were together as husband and wife, we assume the fact that they were together, that was the kedushin. And that's the reason why Rav says they need a get. So again, Abaye is explaining the reason, according to Rav, you need a get is not necessarily because the fact that it didn't sue without specifying shows that he was Michael, he forgave on his Tanai that she doesn't have Nadarim. But rather, the reason is, explains Abaye, because Rav is of the opinion that once they were together, we assume them being together is for a marriage. Says the Gemara, and of course, and what does Shmuel say for the fact that he says, Shmuel holds, and therefore the fact they were together is inconsequential. It does not function as a marriage. So says the Gemara, so the way that you, Abaye, just explained the machlokes Rav and Shmuel is whether Adam Isa Bilas Bilasnos. Comments the Gemara, how Rav and Shmuel already argued about this. We learned Ketana a Ketana. This reminds us of our Yevamos days. A Ketana who was married off by her mother or brother did not do Mion. Mion, of course, is walking out of the marriage. Vegdila, and she grew up and she stayed with her husband. Omda v'nises, and then she goes. So she stayed with her husband. Let's say, for argument's sake, she's 15 right now. She's been with her husband for 2.5 years as a Gedailah. Then, one day she gets up and marries another man. What is the status of this second marriage? Rav Amar, says Rav, she does not need a get from the second person. Why not? The fact that she stayed with her first husband once she was a Gedailah, an adult, they slept together, they were together, the act that they were together, that itself functions as Kedushin. the Be'ilah is never going to be Zinos according to Rav, and therefore the fact that they were together functions as a marriage, and therefore the fact that she went and married someone else is nothing, and they don't need a get from the second person. Shmuel Amar, of course, the opposite. Sricha, get me, sheni. Because Shmuel holds, Adamaisa Bilas Zinos. And the fact that she was together with another man is now a new Kedushin. She lived with her first husband for 2.5 years. As a Gedailah, it's inconsequential, says Shmuel, and you need a get from the second one. So asks the Gemara, according to Abaya, why do we need Rav and Shmuel arguing about the same thing 2 times? Explains the Gemara and answers Sricha. If we only said the case in the case of this young girl, the second case, I would have thought, to know. I would have thought, why Rav holds over there the fact that she's married is a form of Kedushin. The reason is because there was never a Tanai, there was never a stipulation, so we assume that she was married to that man. But in our case, the mere fact that there was a Tanai, Rav, maybe we would think that Rav would agree with Shmuel that she's not doing a full Kedushin because there was a condition. He's not doing a full Kedushin because there was a condition stated prior, and therefore, even though they were together, maybe it is Bilasnos. If it only said our case, maybe only Shmuel said his din over there. But in the second case, the Rav. Maybe you'd agree to Rav Sricha, and that is the reason why we need both cases. So we're answering that we could explain that both our Mishnah and the Mishnah over there is Machlekes Rav and Shmuel with regard to whether Adamaisa Bilas or Bilas Nos, and there's a Chiddush by each. Continues the Gemara, 4 lines on the bottom. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. What is the status, said our Mishnah, if they get married without any Tanaim, any stipulations, and then one day he finds out that his wife has Nadarim? He's allowed to divorce her, and he does not have to give her a ksuba. So the Gemara is medaik. The Gemara infers that for the Mishnah it implies that ksuba u'delay baya. He doesn't have to give her a ksuba. Hagita baya. But it sounds like they're married. Sounds like he needs to give her a get. My love. So says the Gemara, what was the case? The Mishnah said konsa stam. The Mishnah said they got married without specifying anything. But what actually happened? It suggests the Gemara, my love, the kid child tonight, that the original Kedushin was al Tanai. The original Kedushin was the condition. And only afterwards, the konsistam. And yet we see that a get is required. What's the reason? It must be the fact that they were together. That act of being together is Kedushin. Because ain't other Maisa Bilas. To Yofta the Shmuel. And it's a bomb kasha on Shmuel. So continues the Gemara as we turn over the page. And the Gemara says, good kasha on Shmuel, but no. Loi, you know what's going on over here? Whoop. 1 second, pardon, let's get that back. There we go. Says the Gemara, Loi. You know what's going on over here? Kidsha, stop. The case is that they got married, stop. Vikonsa, stop. Excuse me. Loi, Kidsha, stop. Vikonsa, stop. The case they did the Kedushin, stop, and the Nisuin, stop. There were no Tanoim, there were no stipulations. And that's the reason why they need a get. And that's the reason why it's valid. And it's not a kasha on Shmuel. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? I'm a kitchal tonight, the concept tam. But what would have been that case according to Shmuel? If there was a kid tonight by the Kedushin and then they got married, Stam, it would seem that according to Shmuel, it would be the same din Dulabai Gita. So the problem is that for the fact that the Mishnah said that case, should have said even the bigger chiddush, on certainly this case. So ask the Gemara, seemingly, if what you're saying is true according to Shmuel, it should have said that in the Mishnah. Answers the Gemara, Chanami, Kama. Says the Gemara, really, that's what the Mishnah means. But you know, you have to read the Mishnah. So when marries a woman on condition that there are no nedarim, stam, and then he marries her stam, and now you know what we infer. Kitcha stam, vikonsa stam. But you do need a get. So the Gemara explains that don't be medayik the Mishnah you suggested, but rather we have another way of learning up the Mishnah. Asks the Gemara that based on what we just said, an explanation according to Shmuel, that there was no Tanai, there was no stipulation made by the Erisin, and the Kedushin is, they are married, but she does not get her Ksuba. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Ksuba hu delay baya. Hagita baya. So it sounds like she doesn't get a ksuba, but she needs a get. Says the Gemara, but how are you splitting this hair? How are you telling me that she doesn't get her ksuba, but they're married and she has to get her get? Explains the Gemara. The reason she doesn't get her ksuba is why Dami Evshabi not Jonas. Because the husband could claim, I don't need a wife. I don't want a wife that makes the darim. But if that claim is believed, that claim also says he never wanted to marry her. And that claim also says that he should not have to give her a get. So answers the Gemara, Teretz number 1, Amar Rabba, Sricha get midivrayim. You're right. It's a get midirabbanan, that the whole din of the Mishnah is a din dirabbanan requiring a get. Why? Because we don't want people to think that they got divorced without a get. Teretz number 1 of Rabba. Rava Amar, Teretz number 2, Tana Sfuki Misavkale. Explains Rava, the Tana of our Mishnah is not sure. The Tana is the Mishnah not sure if he could say, because he didn't make it tonight, is he able to say, I never wanted this. So Gabi Memoina Likula Bai. Gabi Yisura Lachomra. So when it comes to money, the Allah is Amaitzi Mechaver Love Haraya. Anytime you want to collect money, you have the burden of proof. So you, wife, you want to get your ksuba, bring proof. You don't have proof, you don't get your ksuba. But with regard to Isser, we also have to be machmer due to the suffix, and therefore they can't, and therefore they have to, give a get. So now, says the Gemara, that's how we're going to answer Shmuel in the Mishnah. But now, the Gemara goes back, and we explained that the machlekes Rav and Shmuel was whether we assume Adam Oiseh Bilasei Bilasenos. That was the way that Rav Abaya explained it. Rav held Ein Adam Oiseh Bilasenos, and anytime a husband and wife are together, we assume that act of intercourse is a form of marriage. And Shmuel said no. Omar Rabba. So now the Gemara is going all the way back, and says the Gemara, I'm now going to tell you a different way of learning the machlokes. Different way of learning, I don't know what's going on over here. A different way of learning the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Amar Rabba machlokes, the fourth white line, beto'us shtei nashim. The machlokes is when there's a mistake with two different women. Avol beto'us isha achas divrei kol einoi tzricha himenu get. The din in the Mishnah is only going to be when the man made a tenai that she does not have any nadarim, and the woman, what happened? She did not tell him that she was in fact a woman that had nadarim. So explains the Gemara, it's only going to be a machlokes when there are two different women. But when it's one woman, then everyone holds she does not require a get. Says the Gemara, this is the way again. Rabbah is explaining the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. So Amar Le Abaya, who if everyone remembers was the way who explained it originally, said Abaya 1 second, our Mishnah never mentioned the second woman. Everyone here is thinking, two women, what's going on? The Mishnah didn't have that. And yet, and we asked on Shmuel from our Mishnah. So clearly, the machlokes Rav and Shmuel is not with a second woman, because we asked from our Mishnah when there's only one woman. So Ella explains the Gemara 6 lines into the white lines. If you want to explain a new way of learning the machlokes Rav and Shmuel, you can say as follows: in a way that is similar to two women. So explains the Gemara that in a case where one marries a woman with a tanai that she has no nadarim, and then he wants to divorce her, and then he took her back. So it's really only one woman going on over here. But it's Ka'in, it's as if there's two women, because he married her once, with tonight there are no nadarim. This is how Rashi explains. And then he divorced her, and then he married her again. And the second time, what happened was he did not repeat the neder. So what's the story with the second marriage? We have Tolos Isha Achas Ka'in, as if there are two women. That's going to be the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav is going to say the second marriage is valid, and Shmuel is going to say no. So Abaye again asks on Rav's explanation of the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Ketcha betos. If he married her betayus upachas mishava bruta, or in the case if someone gets married less than a shava bruta, or a child that gets married, even though they send gifts, which sometimes we assume the gifts are a form of kedushin afterwards. Einoi mekudash, as halacha is, she is not married. Why? They only sent the gifts for the first kedushin. ve'im ba'alu kanu. But if any of these cases they were together, they slept together, kanu, they're considered to be married. Shimon Yehuda Mishum Rav Yishmael Amar and ba'alu loy kanu. No, even if they were together, that does not consider that they are married. So explains Abaya. V'hacha, this brisa is the Taisi Sha'achasi, it's one woman, and yet ubeligi. And yet we see this machlokes Tanakama of Shimon Yehuda. So explains the Gemara, explains Abaya, my love, the Taisi Nidarim. Is it not a case that there's a case that it's a Taisi of Nidarim? And the Tanakama says that if they were together, we assume that there's Kedushin. And the Rav Shimon Yehuda says no. So says Abaya, this brisa is mimicking perfectly the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. And seemingly, it's not that there's one marriage, as if there's two marriages, one woman gets married twice. Says Abaye, it seems clearly that they're arguing whether Adam Moisei Bilas and us. Explains the Gemara, Lai, Ta'is, Pachas, Shava, Pruta, Pachas, Shava, Pruta, Ta'is, Pachas, Bishava, Pruta. Says the Gemara, no, you know what the Bryce is referring to when it says Ta'is? Doesn't mean anything about Netarim. It means it was less than Shava, Pruta. Says the Gemara, Pachas, Shava, Pruta, but the Bryce listed that as a case. Kitcha B'Ta'is, it said, Upachas, Bishava, Pruta. Explains the Gemara, Brushka Mavarish, the Bryce was explaining itself. Kitcha B'Ta'is, Kitzad, what is the case of marrying B'Ta'is? Kigoy. They got married with less than a Shava Pruta. And now on that explains the Gemara B'Mai. So what exactly is the Machlekes Tanakama and Rav Shimon Yehuda? Now that we explain the Brisa in a way that Abaye cannot argue. Mar Savar Tanakama holds. A person knows you can't get married less than a Shava Pruta. So when they were slept together, he did it for the sake of marriage. Umar Savar and Shimon Yudel, they know you include of a brute of Chikabael. I take the Judah of Shain Baal, and therefore they're not considered married. So the Gemara concludes that we have two different ways of explaining Machlekes Rav and Shmuel. We have Abaye's way of explaining, and we have Rabba's way of explaining. Abaye tried to ask on Rabba, the Gemara deflected that kasha. Now Abaye is going to continue with numerous more questions on the way that Rabba explains the Brisa. But we're going to leave it for here, and we're going to pick it up from Esvei, the next Kasha of Abaya, and the next Shir, B'siyata Dishmaya.